Hi, I'm Garm1, and this is Midgardia RPG's cool crowdfunding show. I'm here today with Grim from Postmortem Studios. How's it going?
All right, I'm good.
All right. You're the only writer for Postmortem, or the lead writer, or
I occasionally hire out freelancers, but mostly I do everything myself as much as possible to save money. So,
yeah, I know how that goes. So why don't you tell me about some of your stuff? What's your most recent project, I guess?
the project I'm working on at the moment is called Actual Fucking Monsters. It's a kind of very nasty horror game where you play the monsters. It's kind of in part, a reaction to the whole way that the horror genre, well, the horror genre's gone in a couple of directions. You've got the kind of torture porn over to one side, and you've got the kind of Twilight, sparkly vampires, and so on the other side. And in gaming, I think we've often had since the 90s, we've had this whole sympathetic monster thing, which I just wanted to get away from, especially given how, what's a nice way to put it? That there isn't one. How frankly ballless White Wolf and other horror writers have become lately. They seem to be being led around by the nose by reactionary, conservative, censorious types. So I just wanted to kind of spit in the face of that and do something really gratuitously horrible where you play monsters and there is no two ways about it. So it's designed to kind of play out like a pursuit. You can't help but have things go wrong because you have to do horrible things in order to survive, and then the law gets on your tail, and yeah, everything goes downhill from there, and you probably die in a hail of gunfire at a police checkpoint or something. So it's a very cheery game.
Yeah, that kind of like horrible death spiral.
Yeah, yeah, it's the plot arc just goes down. Yeah, there's no upside. But a lot of that is kind of there's some of it's system, but a lot of it is advice on how to play. So you could take the system and do something else with it if you wanted to.
Yeah. Uh, Ballless is an interesting accusation given the recent controversies with White Wolf with the Chechnya supplement,
Yeah,
where they kind of stepped on, kind of went into some difficult subject matter very poorly. Uh,
I think that's highly subjective. I think they did far more offensive things back in the 90s, like the Gypsies source book and so on. But they
yeah,
also did really, really good things back then, like Charnel Houses of Europe and so on. So you need to have the freedom to create whatever you want, and I need to have the freedom to criticize them for it. You know, for every Charnel Houses, you're going to get a Gypsies, but the creators need to have that space in order to create. Now, I don't think there was a problem, at least from my point of view, with them tackling what's going on in Chechnya. It's good that it raises awareness. Vampire has always been set kind of in the real world, but a little bit darker. So that all makes sense. It's not something I think people would have been too upset by back in the day. But now, you know, they've kind of cleared house at White Wolf. They've re-edited the book so that it doesn't have these passages in it. Yeah, however bad their treatment of it might have been, I think it just shows a lack of commitment and a lack of integrity to do that, to go back on it. And that's kind of what I mean about being led around by the nose. And there was the accusations of alt-right sympathies and things which didn't have any legs as far as I could make out. I had Mark Renhagen over on my YouTube channel talking about this kind of stuff, and he's like me. He's very left wing, but he's appalled by these kinds of developments.
yeah. I like to think of myself as a liberty above all kind of guy. I'm not really sure where that puts me in modern politics. Um,
Everything's up in the air. So,
yeah,
yeah.
there's not really a left and a right anymore. Once you get below the very top levels, I guess.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, no. it's certainly a different time for RPG writing. With Twitter and stuff like that backlash comes quick.
Yeah, and companies tend to react before they've really thought it through.
Yeah,
So yeah, shit happens so quickly that it's impossible to formulate a sensible response. A lot of companies should, I think, just take a breath, acknowledge that there's something's going on and that they'll look into it, but instead they just seem to react.
yeah, just nope, that's gone. Well, we're done. Get bad
Yeah,
press, get fired. Yeah.
yeah. Well, it's interesting that this is starting to have legal repercussions. I don't know if you've been following the Steve Jackson Games Frog God
I have not.
controversy. So SJG are coming out with a new edition of the Fantasy Trip, I think, and Frog God Games were kind of subcontracted to produce some material for that. And Bill Webb, is it, at Frog God? He's had a few accusations made towards him of various, naughty drunken behaviors at conventions and so on. And so every time a Frog God Games gets involved in anything, the Twitter storm, like you say, starts up. Steve Jackson Games, he's not afraid to lawyer up as a company. I've tangled with them, so they've got lawyers involved, and basically defamation and tortuous interference with a contract. So that's what they're going after. But I wouldn't mess with Steve Jackson Games' lawyers. So
Yeah, well, Steve Jackson Games' legal team has been pretty top notch since that one time the FBI raided their offices and took every copy of Cyberpunk.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
which was a marketing coup for them, by the way. I don't think you could have done anything better to market a Cyberpunk game than get raided by the friggin' FBI.
yeah. That gives you street cred, really,
Yeah,
doesn't it?
yeah, it's actually on the cover. I believe like like this game got our offices raided by the FBI or something like that. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. This is a big selling point.
yeah, and yeah, couldn't have done better. Yeah, the mixing of real world events and supernatural mythos, I guess. It's a complicated topic, and we see it a lot in like weird World War II stuff. Where a lot of games in that genre will jump immediately to Hitler was a demon, that's why he's evil. And it's like,
Yeah, or
rather
they'll
not.
or they'll even retcon the Nazis. So like, I really like Palo Parente's Dust universe. So you
Yeah.
got Dust Tactics, Dust Warfare. There's a Risk-like board game, and there's an RPG that Modiphius put out. Isn't that good, to be honest? Um, it was a shame. I was really hyped for it. But in their universe, they have this secret society overthrow the Nazi party and kind of take over Germany. So they just kind of slide on past that whole sticky issue by getting rid of the Nazis. That kind of historical revisionism has never particularly sat well with me. I think we kind of owe it to people to represent some of the bad aspects of the past as they were. I mean, like in pulp games as well, in Spirit of the Century, they barely acknowledged that it was a time of enormous racism and other issues. But I think you lose something when you do that. I mean, player characters can always be the exceptions, but if you don't represent the past, I think you lose something. But I was a historian, so I might be a bit biased on that. My grandfather was one of the first soldiers at Belsenbergen horror camp in World War II, which we never found out while he was alive. And I certainly since then feel a lot more of a sense of duty to represent the past unflinchingly. Um, and I do think games can have an educational aspect to them. And I think if we address issues in the past, yeah, that's a positive that can come from gaming, along with math skills, English skills, other things. I mean, you don't want to make it too educational, or nobody will want to play it. But
Yeah.
I think that's still useful. Whether it's learning every type of medieval polearm from Gary Gygax, or learning about the First Crusade or the Cathar heresy or something like that. There's plenty there that you can learn from and represent, and that's interesting. And if we ignore that, again, I think it it loses us creative opportunities.
Yeah, my grandfather was on Juno Beach, and then we don't really know what happened after that. So, yeah, I know where that's coming from. He never talked about more than like a week after that. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
the soldiers were so utterly disgusted with what they saw at Belsen, they burned the whole place down.
yeah.
It's
But yeah,
horrendous.
it's a question of intent with a game. Like yes, you can absolutely do a very medievalist D&D campaign where it's very accurate to I don't want to say the period because it's
Yeah.
not a period. It's a rough facsimile of a period. Like I had a player point out that there were no violins in that period at one point in a game, and I'm just like, the period with the elves and the dragons, violins is where you're drawing the line here, huh? Um,
Yeah. Well,
but
that brings up something something weird that you often find in fiction. So you'll find people saying, "Oh, but there are dragons," as an excuse for human society or something to be utterly different as well. But I think if you look at something like Game of Thrones, it suspends your disbelief for the most part and feels authentic because it's based on the War of the Roses in part, and because the human interactions and so on are kind of what we expect of people in that kind of relative historical period. So because it's so grounded in reality, because it feels so real, that allows the supernatural and weird elements to exist. It sounds like a paradox, but so long as you get the human interactions and so on right, then you can tack on fantasy things. But one of my bugbears is that people often don't think about the implications of fantastical elements, like what effect would dragons have on castle design, or if magicians can conjure fresh food and water out of thin air, what does that do to farming? What does the presence of clerics do when it comes to health and you know deaths in deaths in childbirth and so on? I think the effect of magic is very similar to the effect of modernization on societies. I think you'd see less children, you'd see more prosperity, you'd see more tolerance. So in some ways, what people criticize as fantasy Seattle is a kind of thought through version of a fantasy world where the societal effects of that magic and so on have been incorporated. I find that fascinating, that whole what if process.
yeah, and to quote Shadowrun, RE tolerance, why hate the black guy down the street when there's a guy with green skin and horns living beside you?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I
it's
mean,
just
a lot depends on the world. I mean, that's a high magic world. A low
yeah,
magic world, there's still barriers to travel. You're barely going to know people from the next village over, let alone anything else. So it's different. You've got rules and setting and other things you add to make it, to give it verisimilitude. You have to think about all of that.
yeah. And yeah, it's always kind of weird when like everybody in the setting it is theoretically medieval is just kind of talking like your average person on Twitter. Um, it's weird, except for the bad
Yeah.
guys. The bad guys are the only people with bad traits.
Well, that's another interesting implication. I mean, you consider the alignment system in D&D, right?
I try
In
not to,
that
but
good
yeah,
good and evil are not relative concepts. They are things that actually exist. They are metaphysical forces. There are races that are literally born evil. That just changes the entire moral framework of everything compared to a modern point of view. And lots of people don't think that. Possibly I overthink these things. It's quite possible. Some people just want to go in dungeons and kill things and come out with treasure, and that's fine. But from a creative standpoint, I find it far more interesting to make these worlds make sense in some way.
yeah, it's the DMing curse, right? Like
Yeah.
once you start actually working on it, you're just like, wait, what? This doesn't make any sense.
Okay, but how did the dragon get in the dungeon?
Yeah, I've been working on a homebrew campaign for a while. And I just had to put it on hiatus because I'm getting to the point where I'm just like, I don't understand this world, and I can't stop thinking about it. You ask me questions, and it hurts me. Ugh, it's a problem.
in actual fucking monsters, I've drawn on some real life stuff and some history. I mean, it's not that deep a game. It's about being a monster, doing horrible stuff, and getting your comeuppance. But I've tried to account for things like social media and so on. The government knows, or at least some shadowy agency knows. There's a variety of different Inquisition groups. So you've got the classic Catholic Inquisition. You've got a Protestant Inquisition that was created around Cromwell's time. I've just started writing a section on Scientology monster hunters.
That could be good.
So, yeah, if they don't sue me, we'll see.
Yeah. Good luck getting doxxed in full Operation Snow Whiting, but
Yeah.
Have you heard of that church in Pennsylvania where like people attend the sermons in like bullet crowns and like with rifles, and they get their rifles blessed and stuff?
I have not. I shall have to
Man,
look into
I'll have to send you a link later.
it.
It's a whole thing. I don't want to say weird cult, but a little bit.
The snake bites and strychnine were enough, I think.
It doesn't help that their leader is actually the son of a cult leader from South Korea. I don't know if you
Really?
heard the whole thing like 2 or 3 years back where the prime minister had to step down because it turned out she was getting manipulated by a cult for like forever. Yeah,
Right.
the leader of this church is the son of the guy who led that cult. So it's a whole thing.
Yeah, well, Nancy Reagan was being manipulated by an astrologer and had quite a lot of influence over her husband. So.
Right. And and nothing went wrong there. The 1980s, well remembered, is a great time for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, I am so thankful to have been born after that, man.
I am very old.
Yeah, well, it happens. It happens to all of us. Well, most of us. I was down in America recently, and while I was in an airport, I saw like a thing on the news, like celebrating the glorious legacy of Ronald Reagan, and I'm just like, are you sure?
Did we live through the same period of time? What
Yeah,
am I in Bizarro World? What's going on?
Do you guys remember the AIDS crisis? Like that was a whole thing. Anyway, flipping through your game screen, you've got a lot of interesting stuff going on here. Activate is the one that first drew my attention many years ago. I think I found it when somebody was talking about how would you run Global Frequency as a tabletop game. Yeah.
Well, Global Frequency was an inspiration, but at the time it was like the first rise of Anonymous, and time the Chan culture stuff like Project Chanology really got into people's consciousness. So I was kind of inspired by all that. So in Activate, you play random people who are really good at something, who have been recruited into a kind of anarchic organization, a kind of distributed intelligence network, who tackle problems and issues. And we were talking about gaming with real life. I mean, one of the ideas behind Activate was you could just go to the news, find a crisis somewhere in the world, and then your characters could go and do something about that. It's kind of prescient in a lot of ways, because that whole Anonymous and Chan culture thing and the hacking culture and WikiLeaks and all of that, it's all kind of come after to an extent, and it's very similar in a lot of ways to what I wrote. So
yeah,
and the way the internet censorship has gone, and the way so much communication has shifted onto the blockchain and so on, to be basically uncensorable. I think that's issues I touched on in Activate. So
yeah,
but yeah, if you wanted to run Global Frequency, that would be a good game to do it with.
Yeah,
there is a second edition.
Yeah, I saw that. It runs on Fate, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of weird stuff on the internet right now, like Cicada. If you've looked into that at all, Cicada 3301.
Oh yeah, that's the
It's a bunch of crypto
puzzle,
puzzles.
Or is that the weird puzzle that people have to solve?
The weird puzzle. Yeah.
Yeah.
It gets into some really intense stuff. Cryptographically, at least, and like nobody's really sure who's running it. All like they distributed posters one time, and somebody put all the geolocations together and figured out that the only commonality is that there's a Nissan factory in the same city as all the posters were distributed.
Yeah.
And just like weird crap like that. And then then on the more like serious end of things, you have well, the Syria General on Pol. Pol's a terrible place, obviously, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But they put together the locations of ISIS camps from their training videos and then forwarded the GPS coordinates to Russians who airstrike them. Like,
Yeah. Well,
how did? Yeah.
they tracked down the "He will not divide us" flag. How many times?
Oh, I think we're up to 5 rounds. Well, I think
Yeah,
they're up to 5 rounds.
at one point by star patterns and plane contrails.
Yeah, it was just like, all right. Yeah, no, the amount of like, it's not even the amount of resources, but like you get together people with all of these different knowledge sets, and weird things happen once they're sufficiently motivated. Um,
Yeah,
Sometimes in good ways, like the many times 4chan has found like child predators and like unscrambled their pictures and sent them
yeah,
onto
and
CODs or
animal abuses as well.
yeah, and then sometimes not so good, like when they dox random female game developers on Twitter, which happens more than I'd like, but
Yeah, yeah, I've been on the sharp end of that side of things as well. Yeah, I had things mailed to my house and lots of abusive messages and that sort of, yeah, it happens to everyone.
it's not ideal. Yeah, it's the price of being like even kind of public.
Yeah,
Unfortunately,
I miss anonymity.
yeah, right. I mean, I say
Yeah.
that, and here I am recording my face for the internet, but I made my choice. I've dug my grave.
No going back now.
Yep.
Actually, speaking of global frequency, my ringtone is the global frequency ring from the unreleased pilot of the TV series.
The greatest show never aired. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh man, and that's a tragedy right there. It was good.
it was really good. I think there's been so many shows like that, the kind of quirky genius solving crimes or whatever. It's just flooded, so there was no
Yeah.
space for global frequency to fit in, which is
I
really
mean,
unfortunate.
it wasn't even that then. It was as far as I am aware, it was they kept getting so many calls and emails about how great it was from the leaked pilot that they realized that they had no chance of actually getting any of this to air, like before it ends up on the internet. And they're just like, well,
Yeah.
no point.
Well, that may have been the excuse. I don't know, but
Yeah.
early Fringe is quite similar.
Good old
To,
early Fringe. That was a good first season.
yeah,
Or Warehouse 13 or
yeah.
yeah.
Rewatching that currently, so
Oh yeah. I think I stopped around season 2 or so.
yeah.
Yeah. You've got a lot of games to your name.
Yeah, I've been busy.
Yeah. I see Fatal Highway with Fatal all capitalized. That's not like the other
Not
Fatal.
like Fatal.
Okay.
No, it uses fate, so it's just like a play on
Oh yeah,
words.
okay. That I didn't put that together, even though I'm looking at the cover and I can see the giant Powered by Fate logo. Also, Chav the Knifing, which may be my favorite RPG title I've seen in a while.
Yeah, that's for my kind of spoof World of Darkness series. So you got Bloodsucker the Angst and things like that.
Sorry, it's really
Unfortunately,
good.
it wasn't popular enough, or there would have been werepoodles and other things. But yeah, it didn't sell well enough.
Alas, and
Alas.
Gamergate, the card game, I'm seeing now.
Yep.
It sounds kind of like hell.
That was banned from RPG Now drive-through.
That's.
I think was I the first person to ever get banned from and have a product banned from there? I think I was. So that was taken down, and then later Hentacle was taken down. And they tried to go after something else of mine recently, but they decided it wasn't naughty, so it was allowed to stay on.
Right. Yeah, I know Project's still up there, so I've seen that before.
Yeah, project's on deal of the day at the moment, actually.
Oh,
well,
really?
probably not by the time this goes out, but
I can have this up in like 4 hours.
Cool.
Yeah, and a lot of Tales of Gore stuff I see.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that? I saw the look on your face.
I know vaguely of Gore, and everything I know of Gore convinces me not to read Gore. Let's put it that way. Which I
Okay.
which I assume is a pretty common reaction, actually.
Yeah. So
Um,
it's a big series of science fantasy sort of swords and sandals novels. There's over 30 books in this series, written by a philosopher under the pen name John Norman. Now, what makes it so controversial and strange in people's eyes is that there is a very strong BDSM aesthetic to the whole thing. A lot of sort of gender-based dominance and submission and so on. I find that fascinating personally, both on a personal kink level and on the level of interest in how it applies to society and the foundational assumptions of the series of books. So getting gifted those books many years ago was kind of revelatory for me because this was kind of pre-internet. And I've been fascinated by the world and interested in it ever since because it combines kind of ancient astronaut weirdness and giant birds and sexy fantasy art and kind of a Conan aesthetic as well, or Greek myth aesthetic. All of this kind of stuff together for all it's controversial, the world is really well built and makes a lot of sense. So I'd been pursuing the license for ages, unable to get hold of anyone. And then finally I managed to get hold of his most recent agent and they agreed. I hired the fetish artist Michael Manning to illustrate it. He's done fantastic work. And it's done really well. There's a huge audience out there for it. Most of them women, actually, weirdly enough, but I guess in a post 50 Shades of Grey world, that's not that's not that surprising.
yeah, but for gore, it's always been like that, as far as I'm aware. Just from what I've generally heard.
Yeah, it was when I was doing research, when I was writing the game, I found that there's loads of online role-playing communities, like not dice and paper role-playing communities, but sort of chat room roleplay and Second Life. It was huge in as well. Something like 50,000 concurrent Gurian players in Second Life at its peak. So it was obvious that there was this big audience out there, and a lot of it was online. Because his books started to fall out of favor in the 90s and you couldn't get them anymore, and the online fan community kind of kept it all alive. And hopefully I've managed to tap into that community and satisfy their hunger. I know the author's happy with what I've done and his agent's happy with what I've done, and what more can you ask for, really?
Yeah, absolutely. Not my jam, but always good that it's out there for the people who are into it, right?
Yeah.
What else you got here? 45 Psychobilly Apocalypse or Retro Apocalypse, sorry.
Yeah, so that's so World War III happens almost immediately after World War II, with limited atom bombs on all sides, and eventually society collapses, and it's set in a kind of B-movie mashup. It's like Rifts if Rifts had been set in the 1950s.
Right.
So you've got robot monster and aliens bobbing around and kind of Mad Max but in Cadillacs and all that kind of stuff. And there's an aerial Nazi city from bolted together blimps floating over the place, and the Russians have invaded Alaska, or what's left of the Russians has. So it's just a whole weird mashup of crazy shit.
A little bit Six String Samurai, but more absurd, yeah.
Yes, I hadn't heard of or seen Six String Samurai when I wrote it, but I have since. It's a fantastic film.
It's I love it. I'm not sure I'd go so far as to call it fantastic.
I think it's fantastic, especially the Red Elvises doing the
Yes,
soundtrack.
it's a movie for a certain kind of audience. If you're not gonna buy into that level of pulp, you're gonna hate it.
You're gonna have a bad time.
Yeah, I know a buddy of mine just can't stand the main character's voice, for whatever
Mm.
reason. Yeah, no, you've got a lot of interesting stuff kicking around. Any idea when actual fucking monsters is coming out?
Uh,
I know
right.
that's the big question, but
That is the big question. Well, I'm going into hospital tomorrow to have a checkup, so hopefully that'll be fine and I won't be out of action. The primary writing is almost done. So say a week for tweaks and editing. I think I've got all the art I need, so we're probably looking at middle of next month for release. and shortly after that for the print-on-demand version.
All right, that's not bad.
Yeah, things move quickly in self-publishing.
Yeah, that's one advantage to it, at least nowadays. It was not always this way.
Yeah, and the relative ease of revising the documents as well is nice.
Yeah, absolutely. It's nice to send a bunch of corrections into a publisher, and like 2 or 3 days later, there's an updated version.
Yeah.
I've done that a few times. Mostly when they say clips instead of magazines for guns. That one gets me. I'm one of those guys.
uh,
Huh. Anything else you want to talk about that I haven't brought up?
well, primarily you talk about crowdfunding
Yeah,
sourcing.
it's in the name of our show. Yeah.
Yeah. So my next big project after this will be crowdfunded, and the idea is to do a very grim, dark, no pun intended, a very grim, dark city setting for D&D with some optional rules for making it grittier and nastier as well. So this will be a city where the dead rose and were walled in, and now prisoners, rather than being executed, are basically thrown in there to survive as best they can. And yeah, that'll be the whole setting. I'm trying to get some heavy metal cover artists to do some of the art for me. I want that really, full on horror aesthetic to it. I think that's something that hasn't really been done.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a sucker for cool cover art. Nothing makes me pick a book up off the shelf quite like that. Uh, which I'm sure is not uncommon, but yeah.
Yeah, it's I think a problem that a lot of Kickstarters get into is that you really have to pay out and have your product almost ready to go before you go kickstarting, because you need to attract people with the imagery and so on.
Yeah.
That's really important. It's interesting with covers because sometimes you want something intricate, but everyone does that to an extent. I always thought the White Wolf covers back in the day were masterpieces of understatement. I remember I got Vampire the day it came out in the UK. I was in Aldershot as DVM Games, so going through the shelves looking for something, and just against this wash of very similar covers, there was suddenly this slab of green marble. It just kind of leapt out. I think that contributed a huge amount to Vampire's success, actually, weirdly.
Yeah. I don't really like the current trend towards like here's a billion characters on the cover and like really intricate designs and stuff, and it's the D&D 5e books suck for that. They're awful. They look like garbage fantasy novels. And I'm sorry to the artists, it's not your fault. I know this is the direction that you're given, but they look like a cheap fantasy novel that's just been upsized to that format. Whereas like the 3.5 books, those are excellent looking. Like
yeah,
you grab that, you know exactly what you're getting. This is a big ass arcane tome. Yeah.
Like we called the aesthetic in Third Ed dungeon punk, right?
Yeah.
But no one ever really went with that and made a dungeon punk setting. I was supposed to be doing one with someone at one point. That whole project fell through. But my favorite art in the 5th edition books is actually the little sketches on the end papers at the back of all the, picking a lock and confronting a monster and all that. Those were brilliant. They should have had more of those.
Yeah, the interior art's good. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just they went with a really bland aesthetic for it, which is, well, I mean, that's D&D 5th edition, right? Like, it's serviceable. It does okay.
Yeah.
But it's not gonna knock anybody's socks off generally.
It's not 4th, and that's all I need to know.
Praise be, yes.
Yeah.
I've played 4th like 2 or 3 times, and it sucks.
We did play a full campaign in the Dark Sun setting, but had to kit bash it enormously because it was so reliant on grids and miniatures and everything, and that's just not how we roll.
Yeah.
So I had to really fiddle it, and it really got bogged down at the higher levels because of people getting confused over which powers they had and what they did, and it was just a mess. I did like the extended challenges though; those were good.
Yeah, we do Roll20, so it's all grids generally, um, except for if we're doing Powered by the Apocalypse stuff, obviously, or stuff that doesn't use grids. Um, we did a 50 something episode fourth edition campaign. I only showed
Mhm.
up as a recurring bad guy, and I kind of hated it every time. I'm just like, okay, which of these 8 buttons is hit thing with sword? And they're like, well, actually, that's 3 of them, and it all does slightly different things. And I'm like, okay, but I want to hit this guy with a sword. Like, how do I do that? And that's not a question that you should ever have to ask in a tabletop game.
Yeah.
But
Um,
to each their own, yeah.
yeah. I mean, I've done a few crowdfunded projects and so on, so I could offer some advice for people, I guess.
Go
That
nuts,
might
yeah.
be on theme for the show. Well, like I said, have stuff prepared ahead of time. So have some good art that you can show to get people enthused about the project. Have some of the writing. Make sure you communicate at every step of the process, and then people will be far more forgiving when you inevitably have delays. Gore was crowdfunded and got massively delayed because of the artist. His life just got turned upside down in one way after another, and time kept going on and on. But I didn't get too much flack for it, which I was happy for, because I kept communicating with people and letting them know what was going on and showing them the pieces of art as it came in. I think the other huge piece of advice that I would give anyone going into it for their project is don't overpromise and don't add too many stretch goals. A lot of people get really carried away when they see all that money rolling in and start promising the earth, and then you just can't you can't fulfill the expectations that creates. So I would say keep a lid on it, and remember, if you are backing a Kickstarter or an Indiegogo or whatever, you're not buying a product. You're investing in the creator in the hopes that they will make a product. It's not a pre-order service. Quite often, these people who've never done this before don't necessarily know what they're doing. You may not get anything out of it at the end. So, understand that going into it before you throw money at people. That
Yeah.
would that would be my best generic advice.
Yeah. As for stretch goals, I backed a project that will remain nameless about probably 5 6 years ago. It's still not all out. Had an estimated delivery time of like 2 years, and then like yeah, they hit all their stretch goals, and it's just like, all right. My life has changed so much that I'm no longer interested in your project. And
Yeah.
and then the one part I'm actually interested in, they're like, oh yeah, we can't get to that one because all the delays and the money ran out, and I'm like, I I just wanted that one book, man.
Yeah. One I backed, a Chinese company ran off with their money
Oh
basically,
lord.
but that they're still trying to deliver. But yeah, that's not been good for them.
Yeah, it's happened. It's happened 1 or 2 times. Not like it's not an epidemic in the industry, I don't think. But it has happened.
Yeah,
There's been some high profile cases.
yeah,
What Pumpkin's Homestuck game? Yeah,
yeah. Every big disaster far west really knocks people's confidence in crowdfunding, and that hurts everybody. And this trend I really don't like is established companies that don't need the cash flow using Kickstarter as a pre-order process and as a publicity driver. They don't need your money. Small producers like me, we do. So that's a trend I don't like very much.
yeah. You see, like, well, Onyx Path and Monty Cook Games and stuff, and it's like you guys are real people with a ton of money. Like this isn't even you. This isn't even a project that would require you to get like venture capital or something. This is just you're taking
Yeah.
up money that could be going to other Kickstarter producers, which
Yeah, I mean, it
is
minimizes risk, and margins are very slim in this industry. So to an extent, I can understand it, but
yeah, it's hard to be
it
too
does
grumpy, but yeah,
it does suck money and attention away from new people who could produce something brilliant.
yeah, which is distinct from like other mega successes like the Critical Role animation thing, because that there was a lot they had to do for that,
Yeah, yeah,
and Lord, did they make a ton of money, dude! I could live for the rest of my life on what they made on that project.
yeah.
Take it and run away to the Bahamas. Goodbye any hope of anybody backing a Kickstarter I run with that statement right there. All right. Yeah. Anything you wanted to bring up that didn't quite get into?
I could tell people where to find my stuff.
Yes.
I have a YouTube channel, post-mortem video. There's different playlists for different topics. So it's a pretty scattershot channel. I talk about anything and everything. My company blog is postmortemstudios.wordpress.com. And I have my own shop site now, which I can't be censored off, which is post-mort.com.
All right. Well, it's yeah, where you can find wonderful things like Chav the Knifing and Gory Adventures and the Gamergate card game, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not gonna click that link. I'm just gonna call it a day. Well, it's been good talking to you.
Cool.
Yeah.
We can do it again next time I have a crowdfunded project.
Yeah, and to all of our wonderful viewers, we have a Patreon, we have a Twitch channel. You know, if you're here, you already know that probably. Look in the description. Blah 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 blah. Have a good day.